Welcome to today's webinar, everyone. My name's Scott Lockwood and I'm the Head of Customer Success here at Payapps. Today I'm joined by Dan O'Donoghue, Co-Founder and CEO from our Payapps partner CONQA, who specialise in construction field management software, and we'll be enjoying a presentation from Dan. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Scotty. Good to be here.
Before we get started, guys, I'll just cover off some housekeeping items. Please let me know if you can hear me by typing into the chat bot. Got a few thumbs up coming through, so beautiful. Our session today is going to be around about 45 minutes long. There'll be a presentation by Dan, followed by some live Q&A at the end. The session will also be recorded, so a copy will be sent out later in the week in case anyone can't make it. I'll just call out that everyone in our audience's mics have been muted on entry, just to ensure everyone can hear the presentation clearly. If you do have any questions, however, please feel free to use the Q&A function in the Teams window. We'll also have Elise from CONQA monitoring the webinar in the background. So if you do have any technical issues, she'll be there she will be able to help you out. All right, now we're through the housekeeping. Let's get into it. Thanks again to everyone online for joining us for today's webinar, Quality Assurance, a Solid Foundation for Success. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, again, Dan O'Donoghue, Co-Founder and CEO from CONQA. A quick intro to CONQA, who was founded in 2015 and was built to simplify the way QA inspections are completed by enabling site teams to validate site progress, by making it easy to capture a record of site activity, report accurately, and get paid fairly. But rather than hearing it from me, I'll pass over now to you, Dan. So welcome.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate the intro and for hosting us today. Good everybody. Just to kick into today's agenda, I'm going to cover off what quality assurance is and its origins, what we've seen can make QA work well for a lot of the clients that we work with, and how those records and QA processes can help to minimize disputes, particularly when it comes to supporting fair payment. Then we'll cover off a summary and take any questions that you may have during the session. Please feel free to fire those in the chat bot as we go. Today's going to be a much more content-based approach to what we're talking about, so I won't be taking any product-related questions today, but happy to do that in a follow-up session. So what is QA and where did it originate? QA is really the process of getting things right, ideally the first time, and minimizing errors. Now, its sort of industrial application came to light in the 1930s with the practice of checklists, when Boeing started to make planes that became more complex and sophisticated. This plane here you can see on the screen was one of the ones that they developed in that period, and it was a plane that could carry 5 times the amount of bombs that any other plane could carry prior to that, and fly twice as far as any existing aircraft. Boeing had a shoe-in contract with the US Army. This is before the Air Force actually existed, but sadly, during the exhibition flight, the pilot crashed the plane. Now, what was the reason for this? It was simply because the pilot had forgotten to turn on a system that helped them navigate the plane well. So it was a human error. And rather than looking at what had driven the error through a training perspective, because this was their most experienced pilot, they decided to look into basically a practice of checklists to minimize human error, to stop people from getting distracted or forgetting, which are sort of natural tendencies. And they created pre- and post-flight checklists that are still used very commonly in practice today, and it worked. The aircraft that you can see on the screen became known as the B-17 bomber. That gave the Allied forces a really strategic advantage during the Second World War, and they never suffered a similar crash again. Fast forwards to the early 2000s, the World Health Organization was tasked at trying to improve surgical practices around the world. And rather than looking at expensive technology like robots, they looked into what aviation had achieved and grabbed hold of the humble checklist. which you can see here on the right. They put it in place in 8 hospitals around the world. And initially they got some pushback from the surgeons who had said things like, you know, I've been doing surgery for 20 years. I don't need a checklist to tell me what to do. But they put them in place as simple prompts. They weren't instruction manuals. And like you can see here, they were designed to capture the most common mistakes, like marking the correct side of the patient's body. To counteract the resistance that they were experiencing, they got leadership of the hospitals on board. And when the checklist had been used, it ended up reducing death rates by 47%. So you're half as likely to die when your surgical team are working through a checklist than if they're not. So it's a very powerful process of using checklists to make sure things are correct the first time. And the same thing happens within construction. It involves planning to make sure the errors are prevented, and hence the name inspection and test plan, and that all the crucial key steps are followed. It's about ensuring that the asset is built as per the design and recording that it's compliant, basically documenting that process. Now I want to point out the difference between quality assurance and quality control. But before I do that, I want to touch on the concept of rework. I'm sure you're all familiar with the term. It's basically when someone makes a mistake and has to go back and rectify it. And it's quite hard for a lot of construction businesses to track this accurately, which is why an organization in the UK did a study on it a few years ago. And they found out that the estimated cost of rework came to be about 21%, which is a really ridiculous number. But when you understand how much of a knock-on effect a mistake can have during the construction process, because there's so many subsequent trades and activities that have to follow, and how often that can throw out sequencing and cause disputes, it starts to make sense how it can stack up. But the difference between quality control and quality assurance is that quality control is about identifying the errors, so detecting them quite quickly and resolving them as fast as possible. Quality assurance, on the other hand, is about getting it right the first time. It's about preventing those errors, preventing that rework from occurring, so that everything kind of runs smoothly and the work can be handed back to the head contractor or the client error-free. So what makes quality assurance work? Like health and safety, QA involves a culture. It has to be typically driven by leadership, and the most successful businesses that we work with do so. The leaders make sure the team knows why QA is important, how it can have an impact on their work, their reputation, and ultimately their bottom line. But it's also important to minimize the homework. For a lot of contractors and people based on site that we've begun working with over the last few years, QA has historically been homework. You know, something that they do at the end of the day, end of the week, end of the month, or in some cases, the end of the job, that bit of the mad rush. And in order to make sure you're not making homework, it has to be done out on site, which means it has to be done on a mobile phone, something that's always in someone's pocket, something that's easy to do in a continuous manner. The checklists and ITPs are also simple. Often we'll see QA checklists or inspection and test plans that have had so much kind of risk transfer put into them. You might see something that has a 50-point checklist for any single task. And while that might stop, you know, potentially any errors from occurring, it gets into the position where it's not practical. Someone on site has got a million things they've got to do. QA is just one function of that. And if you're asking them to check off things that aren't relevant to that task, they're not going to use it. It goes into the too hard basket and becomes irrelevant. So keeping checklists to be simple and on point, focused on what's happening for that given task on that project, typically ensures that you're going to get engagement in this process and not waste people's time. Training is always important. No matter how simple the technology, if you are using it, which is our #1 priority at CONQA, to make sure that it's as easy to use as possible, you still want to make sure it's accessible to anyone and everyone. Often it can be the most experienced members who can struggle with technology, but getting their support and buy-in is huge for actually adding value and creating a a consistent process. The next one is you want to substantiate the work that has actually been done. The checklist is one part of it. You're trying to minimize the errors. You want to make sure that you're looking at the work while you're going through the checklist so that you can do so, but actually enriching the records with evidence, particularly photos, is what can be ultimately really valuable to any given business. A picture can be worth 1,000 words. Well, for many of our customers, it's been worth thousands and thousands of dollars. We've got examples of some of our plumbing customers have been involved in leak claims on large high-rise projects. Through their records, they were able to go back and show that the pressure had been tested with a photo of the pressure gauge and show the work that was in the wall now concealed, and highlight that the leak wasn't caused by them, it was caused by subsequent damage. So the records in that case, from the quality assurance perspective, really added a lot of value when it came to the dispute and ultimately rework that arose from that leak. And finally, it's about connecting the site to the office. Getting information from site can be a challenge at any time. Site people have got a lot on their plates, a lot to do, and reporting back to the office can be a challenge. So using QA as a process that's already being done to help capture evidence and records and data from site that can be easily accessed by people back in the office who have to be preparing and submitting the claims makes things easier from everybody. That streamlines overall processes, making things more efficient, and ultimately helps to make sure that the claims can go through smoothly and accurately, which in turn helps to minimize disputes. Payapps have done this excellent research you can see on the right-hand side of my screen here that highlights CAs and QSs are spending 3 to 5 hours plus on compliance-related tasks with subcontractors in any given week, and that almost 50% of CAs or QSs are having 6 or more disputes in a given week as well. These kind of activities don't really add value to many organizations unless you're a dispute lawyer. So ensuring that the records are there to help make the CAs and QSs jobs easier makes it more likely that the claim will be approved. Without any knockback, you'll get the full claim, and ultimately it leads to a win-win. And I just wanted to throw it to Scott here because I know, Scott, you've got a lot of experience with Payapps and living in this environment, and just wanted to get your take on some of the stories that you've heard and how really good records that can come through to accompany a claim can actually make it easier for everybody.
Yeah, sure, Dan. It certainly is a really common piece of feedback that we hear from our customer base, and that's really centered around the time pressures that CAs and QSs are under. So there's always that thinking that if you can have better substantiation around your claims, you're in a position where you can approve it at, or more often than not, approve it at the value that's been requested, and have the confidence to do so, as opposed to then, to Dan's point, having to go back and you find that there might be some rework that's required around the corner. So it is a really important one.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Scott. And yeah, we've got a couple of quotes here from organizations that we've worked with. Some of them aren't actually our clients, like Fidel's on the left-hand side. But it's just to highlight the importance that these records can help everybody, whether it's the client PM who's looking at a claim for the principal and trying to make sure that the work that they're processing has been substantiated and is fair and is accurate and doesn't have any, GST embedded within the claim, so to speak, or it's from the subcontractor. So this example here was working with on a project which was getting contractual, and by having the records of all of the in-ground trenching that they were doing and all of the markups that they'd done of the drawings, all of the photos attached of the trenching, and any other test records that they'd done, they were getting paid 100% of their claim, which is kind of what the industry wants and needs. It mitigates the risk from the main contractor or the head contractor's perspective of overpaying, because if they do that, they're in a position of risk. They're taking on the chances that subcontractor could go under. But at the same time, if they underpay they put their supply chain under pressure. Subbies, as I'm sure many of you on the call, have got weekly labor costs that you have to pay, and they don't stop whether you get your claim approved or not. And so it's in the head contractor's interest to make sure that you're cash flow positive as well. And that's why using the process and leveraging the process of QA, that's something that's already expected and asked for on projects that you have to be doing. Sometimes contractors will be doing it at the end of the week or end of the month because it becomes homework. Sometimes they'll be leveraging technology like our product, but there are many others out there to ensure that they're keeping it up to date and tracking it as they're going. So everything is supporting the work that then leads to the claim and that record transfer from site to the office, whether it's for QA, but also for things like variations and day worksheets. They can also come through as well. And ultimately, just it helps everyone to get paid fairly, which is what I think the industry requires. So jumping in to the summary of this now, QA is about getting it right. That's why it's predominantly, particularly in the commercial context, subcontractor responsibility. And it's about documenting that you got it right, having that record of work to prove it. QA is often driven by leadership. The best organizations tend to have leadership buy-in and leadership driving it and measuring it. QA processes should be easy. Like if you're making these hard, it very easily falls into the too hard basket stacked up against the 100 other priorities that any site leader will have. So making it easy is crucial, but also ensuring that it's easy to capture a record of work. Photos, any test records that are required, material certificates, things of that nature that can go into the quality assurance documentation to basically substantiate as proof, hey, this has been done and this has been done to the specification. Once those records are captured on site, having it connect to the office where people who are responsible for assessing the work and putting the claim through can easily access it so that they can submit it to their counterparts on the other side of the fence who don't need to then chase their project coordinators or their reps who have to do a site visit in order to substantiate it. It just creates a streamlined focus for everybody and can help make sure that those claims can be approved quickly and approved fairly, which result in fewer disputes for everyone. So yeah, thank you everybody for your time today. I'm gonna jump over to the questions now. As I said at the top of this, we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar, and there'll be a link to a product tour next week if anybody wants to take a deeper look at CONQA. But I'll stop sharing my screen now and jump across to Scott, and we can take any questions.
Terrific. Thanks very much for that, Dan. I know a few points that you raised there certainly hit home from my perspective. I think that ease of use yet powerful results, that certainly struck a chord, as well as a better substantiation of claims, which, as I said, yeah, there's not a week goes by that we don't have feedback from our customer base around those 2 points. All right, so we'll go through to our Q&A. I'll just wait for a couple of questions to come through.
I can see Maria thought this was a course on how you should use Payapps.
Apologies, Maria. We'll set up a separate response around that. We've got another couple of Payapps webinars coming up, but yeah, apologies for that. Dan,
in terms of how
sorry,
I just wanted to add to that, Maria. In terms of how the products do work at a high level. On how to use it. A lot of our customers will take the records from products like CONQA, whether it's the QA reports or the summaries that you can gain for the work, but also the information that comes through from variations and dayworks to then accompany that in the compliance section when a claim is submitted within Payapps. So it's just there to accompany the claim of what's going through as Payapps. It's just a record of substantiation. So hopefully you're familiar with where that is or will become with the follow-up session, but those are how the two products align and kind of connect.
Sure. Dan, I might throw a question at you if it's okay.
Yeah,
I know variations is a key area of the CONQA offering, and I suppose with construction contracting, it's always a key component of cost and an area that everyone always has a lot of visibility on. Can you maybe just run us through in terms of how CONQA empowers both head contractors and subbies to be able to keep tabs on that equation?
yeah, for sure. I think like QA, it's a site-based process. If it's done on paper or manual means, it's pretty hard to capture records around what's been done, what was involved, the date and time that these activities were completed and took to complete. And the reason we added the variations tool was because QA was being as a solid record of work for everything that was in scope, so it could help with the claims on that side. And the variations component was something that was missing initially. So the way it works is you can add in a variation whether you've been delivered it formally from a site instruction or you've received it verbally, get that signature confirmation there and then in person, and then go through and complete all the relevant records around what was involved in the variation. And again, taking those photos, making sure that that is bedded into those reports, and then you could submit those in your claim space within Payapps. So we've got a lot of customers who can save a lot of money in that and a lot of headache from minimizing disputes. And yeah, it's again just about making that process simple and easy.
Yeah, I don't think you can have too much info when it comes to varies in my experience in terms of substantiating.
Yeah, 100%. You would try and strike that balance with the product of making it fast for the guys on site, because we know that they're not necessarily renowned for documentation. But yeah, you can save yourself a lot of headaches by having those backup records.
Sure. All right. Just having a look at, got another question through from Mandy. Thanks for your question, Mandy. Is CONQA just an app or is there a browser-based version?
Oh yeah, thanks, Mandy. No, it's both. So the app, which works on Android, iOS, is available offline, is the key to the data capture. Those would be typically used by the site supervisor, site foreman, site engineer. But the browser-based version is what's used back in the office, and that's where you can do all the reporting. That's where project managers or those preparing claims will typically live within the product. So you can review everything in a much more, you've got much more space on a screen to capture that, and that's where it's easier to pull those reports and all that information from. So it's both. But thank you for the question, Mandy.
Right. We'll just give everyone another 10 seconds or so if there's any final questions coming through.
We've got a comment there from Marion Joseph. It reads, depends on the work/task, but do we have any good examples of a successful QA checklist? It's hard. It does, typically vary, but I think in terms of principles, it would be things that capture the most risky elements. So if I was to write a given checklist for any given task, kind of regardless of what it is, I would say, what are the most common mistakes that we experience from this task and what ends up costing us the most? And the Checklist Manifesto, which is where the book that study came from, an interesting book for those who are keen to learn more, highlighted that the ideal checklists typically have 10 to 12 or fewer checkpoints. So you want to try and keep it short and succinct, relevant to the task. Some of the ones that we would see, for example, like Windows would be, is the opening correct? Typically you're checking that predecessor trade, the one who's coming before you, to make sure that you're accepting the correct work and you can get access to it. Those are typically some checkpoints we would see at the start and at the end as well. You would see, okay, has the work been completed correct? Is the finish correct? Is it in the wall? And then capturing records of that, because that becomes, again, proof of the end product, which supports the claim that goes into Payapps, but also just helps to cover any risk of any further subsequent damages. So typically you'll see things sandwiched between that and covering off the most successful the most risky elements within those checklists. We do have a series of templates available from CONQA, but in terms of overall principles of how you might write one, that's what I would focus on. It's another good question.
Terrific. I think, Dan, that looks like it's it for questions from our audience. If one comes through while we're wrapping up, we'll jump on it. But from my perspective, Dan, thanks so much for taking us through your presentation this morning. I certainly got a lot out of it, and no doubt our audience did as well. Just a reminder to our audience that today's session has been recorded, so you'll be getting a copy of the recording towards the end of the week. But in the interim, if you do have any more questions, feel free to send them through, and we'll jump on them.
Thanks, team. Thanks everyone for your time today. Cheers, Scotty. Appreciate it, mate.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks again, guys. Bye.
Bye.